Something happened in February 2026 that doesn't happen often. A story with no confirmed ending, no arrested suspect, and no definitive resolution became the single most discussed non-political news event in the United States. Millions of people who had never heard the name Nancy Guthrie before January 31st found themselves checking their phones at midnight for updates. True crime content creators flew to Tucson from Rhode Island, from Florida, from across the country, and set up live streams outside a quiet desert neighborhood in the Catalina foothills. Yellow flowers started appearing outside an empty house that no one inside could appreciate. A sheriff who had spent his career speaking to local reporters suddenly found himself chosen every word carefully because the entire nation was watching. And all of this, every single thread of this, happened before anyone knew where Nancy Guthrie was, or who took her, or why. So why? What is it about this specific case, this specific woman, this specific disappearance that created a level of collective attention most major news stories with definitive outcomes never achieve? Because here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody in the media is saying clearly enough. Most missing persons cases in America don't get any of this. At the end of 2024, there were over 93,000 active missing persons cases in the United States. 93,000. And the overwhelming majority of those families are sitting in living rooms exactly like the Guthrie family, waiting, hoping, filming videos, begging for tips, with no cameras outside their house, no FBI billboards in California, no $200,000 combined reward, and no sheriff giving daily press conferences. So before we analyze why this case gripped the nation, I think we have an obligation to name that disparity directly, and I want to know what you think about it. So I'm going to ask you a direct question at the end of this that I genuinely want you to answer in the comments. Now, back to the question. Why Nancy Guthrie? The first layer is the most obvious one, and it's the one most people reach for immediately: Savannah Guthrie. Her daughter is one of the most recognizable faces on American morning television. Tens of millions of people have eaten breakfast with Savannah Guthrie on their screen for years. They know her laugh, they know her cadence. They've watched her cover presidential elections, interview world leaders, report on some of the most consequential stories of the last decade. And then, on a Monday morning, her co-anchor Craig Melvin looked at the camera and said, "This is a deeply personal story for us." Savannah wasn't there. She was in Arizona. And everyone watching understood immediately that the professional distance was completely gone. This wasn't Savannah Guthrie, the journalist. This was Savannah Guthrie, the daughter, standing on a porch in Tucson, crying, asking a stranger to please give her mother back. That pivot, from public figure to private grief, played out entirely in the open, is psychologically destabilizing for an audience. It collapses the protective barrier between a news anchor and a real person. Suddenly, she felt like someone's neighbor. And when your neighbor's mother goes missing, you don't change the channel. But here's where my analysis diverges from what most commentators are saying, and I want to be clear that this is my opinion. Celebrity proximity alone doesn't explain the scale of this. The celebrity connection is the ignition. What turned this into a sustained national obsession is the specific architecture of the case itself. The way every detail revealed raises exactly one more question it refuses to answer. Think about the information structure. We know she was home. We know the garage door closed. We know her pacemaker disconnected at 2:28 in the morning. We know her blood was found on the porch. We know a masked man was on that porch in the pre-dawn hours. We know a glove was found 2 miles away with male DNA that doesn't match anything in federal databases. We know ransom communications exist, but their authenticity hasn't been confirmed. We know she needs daily cardiac medication to survive. We know 400 investigators are working the case, and we know nothing about where she is. That is a psychological trap. The human brain is constructed to close open loops. It cannot rest in genuine uncertainty about questions it has emotionally engaged with. Every new detail this case releases functions like the next chapter of a book that keeps ending on a cliffhanger. The audience can't put it down because the resolution hasn't arrived. And unlike a Netflix series, there is no release date for the finale. The third layer is one that I find genuinely disturbing, and I say that without judgment, because I think it applies to all of us in the true crime space, including me. This case activated the armchair detective reflex on a scale I haven't seen since Gabby Petito in 2021. Hundreds of thousands of people on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Reddit, analyzing the doorbell camera footage frame by frame, identifying the specific Ozark Trail backpack down to the model number, speculating about family members, generating theories about cartel involvement, proposing that the pacemaker Bluetooth signal could be intercepted from helicopters. And here is the fascinating thing. Some of that speculation was genuinely useful. The backpack identification came partly from public amplification. The sheriff himself told the media that their coverage had produced hundreds of leads. But then Arizona Democratic Representative Adelita Grijalva went on CNN and said the armchair detective culture was actively hurting the investigation, that reckless accusations were being made about people who had no connection to the case, that the sheriff's department was receiving so many contaminated tips that it was slowing the filtering of real intelligence. A California man was arrested and charged with sending a fake ransom note demanding Bitcoin. These two things, crowdsourced help and crowdsourced chaos, are not opposites. They are the same impulse operating on different information and different levels of restraint. My opinion on this, which I want you to push back on in the comments, I think there is a meaningful ethical line between engaging with a public case through legitimate journalism and analysis, which creates accountability and keeps attention on victims who deserve to be found, and treating an ongoing investigation like interactive entertainment, which introduces noise into a system that is trying to find a living person under time pressure. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She cannot walk 50 yards without assistance. She has a pacemaker and requires daily medication. The sheriff said from the beginning that her medical situation made time the defining variable. Every hour spent chasing a false lead generated by someone typing a theory on their phone is an hour that 400 trained investigators could have spent on real intelligence. So when I cover this case, I think carefully about what I add to the conversation and whether it generates signal or noise. I don't think this channel contributes to the chaos. I think we contribute to the accountability. But I know not everyone in this space is thinking about that distinction. And I want to know if you are. Do you think public engagement with missing persons cases helps more than it harms? Tell me your honest answer below. Now let me get to the layer of this case that I think gets the least attention and deserves the most. The reason this case unsettled people in a way that goes beyond celebrity, beyond true crime psychology, beyond the viral mechanics of social media, is that it happened in a place and to a person that felt immune. Nancy Guthrie lives in the Catalina foothills. This is a quiet, semi-rural neighborhood north of Tucson where the houses are set back from the road, where the community is described as laid back and gentle. Nancy had lived in the Tucson area for more than 50 years. She was, by every description, the kind of woman a neighborhood is organized around without noticing. Present at church, mahjong with neighbors, birthday visits from grandchildren who covered her with kisses. The neighbor who placed a cherub from her garden at the makeshift tribute outside Nancy's mailbox. That detail gets to me every time I read it. It's supposed to bring peace and protection, she told CNN. That is the language of a community that believed until February 1st that the peace and protection were already there. The reason this case scared people in Tucson and across the country is not because it was extraordinary. It's because it was supposed to be impossible. An 84-year-old grandmother, in a good neighborhood, with her garage door closed behind her. And someone still got in. There is one more dimension here that I haven't seen discussed anywhere in mainstream coverage, and I think it's the most important psychological driver of all. Google Trends data, reviewed by Fox News Digital, showed spikes in searches for Nancy Guthrie's home address originating in Arizona as early as June 2025, 8 months before she disappeared. There were searches for Savannah Guthrie's salary coming from the Tucson area in December 2025. Investigators haven't confirmed whether this is connected to the case. But think about what that data suggests if it is. It would mean that whoever did this was not a stranger operating on impulse. It would mean they were tracking this family, studying the public information available about them, calculating the financial logic of targeting an elderly relative of a high-earning television personality for the better part of a year. It would mean the night of January 31st wasn't a decision. It was an arrival. And that transforms the fear this case generates from random crime is terrifying into something quieter and harder to dismiss. The recognition that visibility itself can be a vulnerability. That the salary information publicly available about Savannah Guthrie, the photographs of Nancy on the Today Show in November describing her peaceful Tucson life, the fact that anyone could find the Catalina foothills neighborhood on a map, all of that may have been the architecture of a plan that was already being built while Nancy was going to mahjong and watching the Olympics and playing cardi games with her grandchildren. I want to know what your theory is. Not a name. I'm not asking for speculation that could harm innocent people. but the behavioral profile. Does this feel to you like a professional operation? Does it feel like someone local? Does the cryptocurrency ransom demand, first Bitcoin, then reportedly a switch to Monero for its privacy features, suggest someone with specific technical knowledge, or does that feel like someone who watched too many dark web tutorials? Because that shift between cryptocurrencies, which Newsweek covered and which blockchain forensics experts flagged immediately, is genuinely interesting from an investigative standpoint. Monero is architecturally different from Bitcoin in one key way. The transactions are designed to be untraceable in ways Bitcoin never fully was. That is not a choice you make by accident. That is a choice you make because you know the difference. Drop your read on this in the comments, because this community has been right before on details the mainstream press missed. Here is where I land on all of this, and I want to be transparent that it is an opinion and not a conclusion. I think the Nancy Guthrie case became a national obsession for 6 reasons that all converged at once. Celebrity proximity provided the initial audience. The specific structure of mounting evidence without resolution provided the psychological trap that kept them. The geographic and demographic profile of the victim, elderly, alone, medically vulnerable, in a neighborhood where this wasn't supposed to happen, provided the existential fear. The moral clarity of a case with no ambiguity about victim status provided the emotional permission to be fully invested. Social media provided the infrastructure for millions of people to process that investment publicly and together, and the absence of a resolution keeps every one of those drivers active. This case has no ending yet, which means the obsession has no natural release point, which means it will continue to grow until either Nancy Guthrie comes home, or the worst answer arrives, or the silence becomes the story itself. And the question I can't stop sitting with, the one I'm going to leave you with, is this. Of the 93,000 people currently listed as missing in the United States right now, how many of them had a garage door close behind them in exactly the same way? How many of them had a family member filming a video and asking someone to please just call? How many of them had a neighbor who wanted to put a garden cherub by the mailbox, but there was no camera crew to photograph it? Tell me in the comments whether you think the attention this case receives is a feature of a system that works, or evidence of a system that is fundamentally broken. Because I don't think it's obvious, and I think you have a more considered view on this than the algorithm expects you to.